The envelope was on the kitchen table when I got home from work, a cream-colored, gold-embossed envelope with calligraphic lettering. Typical Teslin. Even the invitation should scream her superiority. I tossed the keys beside me and sighed heavily. Ruby, my 7-year-old daughter, peeked out from behind the refrigerator with a yogurt in her hands. "What's that, Mommy?" she asked, pointing a sticky spoon at the envelope. "Nothing important." I tried to smile, but I could feel the corners of my lips pulling down stubbornly. I knew what was inside without even opening it. For the past month, my mother hadn't shut up about Teslin's splendid engagement. "Your cousin has finally found a worthy man. Addison comes from such a respectable family. They'll be the perfect couple." Each time, the subtext was obvious. Unlike you, Avery. That evening, when Ruby finally fell asleep, cuddled up against her shabby plush hippo, I returned to the kitchen. I opened the bottle of cheap red wine I kept for especially hard days and stared at the envelope. 3 years ago, Ethan would have been sitting next to me, putting a warm hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, Ave," he would have said, and things would have gotten a little easier. But Ethan's been gone for 3 years now, and nothing gets any easier. I opened the envelope. Inside was a card decorated with ribbons and flowers, an invitation to Teslin Laurentine and Addison Havisham's engagement party to be held in 2 weeks at Lakeview Country Club. I grinned. Of course, only Teslin could throw a separate engagement event without waiting for the wedding. One always needs a reason to show off. The fine print on the invitation read, "Children welcome." A clear jab in my direction. Teslin knew I had no way of leaving Ruby with someone. No excuses for refusing. My phone vibrated. "Mom, an amazing coincidence if you believe in that sort of thing." "Hi, Mom," I said, taking a big sip of wine. "Did you get the invitation?" she asked without preamble. I just opened it. "You're going, right?" Teslin had specifically said she could bring Ruby. I closed my eyes. "No, I don't want to go. I don't want to see their smug faces, hear the whispers behind me, pretend everything's okay. I'm not sure. I have a lot of work to do and—" "Avery Paxman," her mother's voice turned steely. "This is a family event. Your Uncle Winston is making a special visit from Seattle. You're coming, period." I stayed silent, looking around my apartment, small but cozy, with Ruby's toys scattered about and stacks of my work papers. After Ethan died, we'd moved to this neighborhood in Austin, away from the upscale suburb where we'd lived before. Couldn't afford that life anymore. A technical writer at an IT company doesn't make as much as Ethan made at his law firm. "Avery, can you hear me?" "Yeah, Mom, I'll be there." "Okay." Cell phone rings. "And buy something decent. Don't come in the same pants you wore at Christmas." 3 years. 3 years have passed, and I still feel like I'm being punished for loving the wrong person, for daring to be happy outside of their rules. When I'd introduced Ethan to my family 8 years ago, my mother had smiled strainedly, and Uncle Winston had questioned his prospects defiantly. Teslin, with her perpetual superiority as a Princeton graduate, could barely contain her contempt. "A regular lawyer from a state university? Really, Avery?" We got married despite their disapproval, and when I got pregnant, Uncle Winston had the nerve to ask if Ethan was sure the baby was his. My mother explained later that it was just a joke. I set the empty glass aside and rubbed my temples. Memories of the wedding when half the relatives couldn't make it, of Teslin refusing to be a bridesmaid because of a work trip, which she then posted on Instagram as a vacation in the Bahamas. And then there was Ethan's illness, a rare, aggressive form of leukemia. We fought for a year and a half, chemo, experimental treatments, whatever we could afford. My family sent condolence cards when it was over. Teslin wrote on Facebook how brave her cousin had been, not forgetting to mention that some of the difficulties could have been avoided by choosing a more reliable life partner with good health insurance. I crumpled the invitation, but then straightened it out. There was no point. I'll go, endure their condescending looks, congratulate Teslin on her perfect fiancé and perfect life. And I'll smile even when she once again calls my job such a nice part-time job. I woke up this morning to Ruby jumping on my bed. "Mommy, get up. Mrs. Parker promised to show us how to make cotton candy clouds today." I smiled, looking into her brown eyes, just like Ethan's. Sometimes I think they're all I have left of him. Give me 5 minutes, sweetheart. I'm gonna get up and make you breakfast. The day went on as usual. Driving Ruby to school, driving to the office, editing technical documentation for the company's new product, lunch at the table with colleagues who talked about their spouses and vacations. After work, picking up Ruby, making dinner, checking homework, bedtime reading. In the evening, I called my only friend Georgia, an English professor at a local college. We met at a support group for widows and widowers a year ago. Did they invite you to this flashy engagement party? She asked after hearing my story. Yes, and my mom insists I go. Your mom's always on the side of those snobs, Georgia sighed. You know what? We'll find you a dress that will make your Teslin green with envy. I laughed. I need a dress that makes me invisible. I just want to do my time and go. Ave, when are you going to learn to fight back? 3 years of letting them treat you like a loser just because your husband died, like it's your fault. I bit my lip. It's not that. It's just, it's easier not to fight. For Ruby? For Ruby, I agreed. She loves her grandmother, and it's not her fault. Georgia was quiet. Okay, but remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. The 2 weeks flew by. The day before the engagement, Ruby and I went to the mall. We had to buy a dress that wouldn't upset my mother, but wouldn't break my budget. While we were shopping, I remembered the first time I'd met Ethan. It was in a cafe. I was working on a story. I was still a freelance journalist then. He sat down at the table next to me, opened a folder with documents, and his coffee accidentally tipped over my notes. Ethan was so guilty, he offered to not only buy a new coffee, but to print all the ruined pages. We talked until the coffee shop closed. 6 months later, we moved in together. Another year later, we were married. My family thought we were in a hurry. Maybe they were right, but I wouldn't trade those 5 happy years for anything. Mom, look! Ruby's voice snapped me out of my reverie. She was pointing to a display of baby dresses. Can I have that pink one? It's like a princess. The dress was beautiful, but the price made me cringe inwardly. I looked at her hopeful eyes. Let's try it on, I said, knowing that if it fit, I'd have to save for something else next month. In the fitting room, looking at a glowing Ruby, I thought about how I would never tell her how my family really felt about us. At least let her grow up without knowing about this toxicity. I picked out a simple blue dress for myself, elegant enough not to make me look like a poor relative, but not so expensive that it was a significant blow to my budget. That evening, I pulled out the invitation again and ran my finger over the groom's name, Addison Havisham. Something about the name seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd heard it. Perhaps Teslin had mentioned it before, though she usually kept her personal life a secret until a worthy candidate came along. That night, I dreamed about Ethan. We were sitting on the veranda of our old house, and he was laughing as he watched Ruby chase butterflies in the garden. Don't let them take away your joy, Ave, he said, and I woke up with my cheeks wet with tears. In the morning came a text from my mother. Don't be late, and don't forget your present. I sighed. Of course, the gift. Another expense I hadn't considered. I had to stop at the mall on the way and buy some expensive vase that I was sure would turn out to be wrong for Teslin. Ruby was thrilled with her new dress, and all the way to Lakeview she talked about how she was going to show it to her cousins. I listened half-heartedly, preparing myself for the challenge ahead. 3 hours. I only have to make it 3 hours, and then we can leave, citing Ruby being tired. I didn't realize that this evening would change everything, that the invitation I'd almost thrown away would be the turning point in my life, and that a man I hadn't even met yet would silence my entire toxic family in a way I hadn't been able to in all these years. The Lakeview Country Club glowed with lights reflecting in the lake behind the main building. I held Ruby's hand tightly as we walked down the stone-paved walkway to the main entrance. My daughter admired the lanterns hanging from the trees and whispered, "It's like a fairy tale, Mommy." I smiled, trying not to show my tension. In my hands, I carried a gift box with a vase I had bought at the last minute. There were already about 20 cars in the parking lot, mostly premium SUVs and sport sedans. My shabby Ford looked so out of place that I deliberately parked farther away from the entrance. Don't get ahead of yourself, I warned Ruby, who was rushing for the door. And remember what we said about behavior. Don't interrupt adults, say thank you and please, and don't get your dress dirty, she listed with a serious look. I remember, Mom. There was a young man in uniform standing at the door checking the invitations. When I showed him mine, he raised an eyebrow slightly, as if surprised that someone like me was invited to such an exquisite event. Or maybe it just seemed that way to me. I'd become overly sensitive to such things in recent years. Inside, the club's lobby was decorated with floral arrangements and ribbons in cream and gold. Waiters scurried around with trays of champagne and canapes. Classical music, something by Vivaldi, I think. Avery, you made it! Mom appeared in front of me out of nowhere. Her tone said, I wasn't sure you'd dare show your face. She was wearing an elegant dark green dress that I'm sure cost like 3 of my monthly paychecks. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure, a pearl necklace around her neck. Since her father's death 6 years ago, she had immersed herself in our family's social life, as if trying to forget her past as a junior high school teacher. Hi, Mom. I kissed her cheek, smelling the familiar scent of Chanel 5. Of course I'm here. You said it was important. Grandma! Ruby rushed to hug her, and her mother softened for a second, crouching down to hug her granddaughter. How beautiful you are, sweetheart. A real princess. She adjusted the bow on Ruby's dress. Come and see. There's a fountain with fish in the garden. Don't get dirty. Ruby ran excitedly in that direction. I wanted to follow her, but my mother held me by the elbow. You can leave your presents over there. She pointed to a table against the wall, already littered with boxes and bags. And then join the guests. Everyone's already gathered. Everyone meant those relatives and family friends who'd thought I was a lousy sheep ever since I'd chosen Ethan over the suitable fiancé Aunt Fiona, had tried to match me with the son of her friend who worked at the bank. I nodded and headed for the gift table. On the way, I spotted Ruby through the glass door. She was already standing by the fountain talking to the other kids. At least she'd have fun. Leaving the box, I took a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter and took a deep breath. 3 hours. Just 3 hours. The main action took place in the banquet hall, a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking the lake. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light on snow-white tablecloths and silverware. In the center was a large table for the main celebrants and round tables for the guests on the sides. I saw Teslin at once. She stood surrounded by her friends, radiant and gorgeous in an ivory dress embroidered with beads. Her long blonde hair was arranged in an elegant style, and a diamond necklace sparkled around her neck. Standing next to her was a tall, dark-haired man in an impeccable suit. It had to be Addison. I tried to stay out of the way, maneuvering between groups of guests. I found my name on a card at the far table, as far away from the main table as possible, of course. There was a place for Ruby and a few other names of people I barely knew, family acquaintances. Uncle Winston, my mother's brother, spotted me and approached with a smile that never reached his eyes. Tall, with graying temples and a sharp gaze, he always reminded me of a bird of prey. Avery, darling, what a surprise to see you here. He put his arm around my shoulders, and I smelled the scent of expensive cognac and cigars. Hello, Uncle Winston. How was Seattle? I forced a smile out of myself. Thriving, like my business. He dismissed my question as if it were a formality. But tell me about yourself. How do you manage? With everything? His voice sounded falsely involved. I'm fine, I answered briefly. Ruby's growing up, my job is stable. Yeah, you're writing something for a computer company, right? He took a sip from his glass. You know, I have a friend at a publishing house in Seattle. Maybe he could offer you something a little more, promising. Translation. Your job is nothing, and you'll never be able to provide for your daughter properly. Thank you, but I'm happy with my current position. I took a sip of champagne to hide my irritation. Suit yourself, he shrugged. Oh, I think the formal part is about to begin. I don't want to keep you. And he left, leaving me feeling like I'd just been through an unpleasant interview and failed. I found Ruby with my eyes. She was still in the garden with the children. Then I heard the clinking of glasses. Someone was calling for attention. The guests began to take their seats. Teslin and Addison took the center seats at the main table. To Teslin's right were her parents, Aunt Melanie and Uncle Greg, and to Addison's left were his parents, whom I didn't know. My mother sat next to Aunt Melanie, clearly proud of her proximity to the center of events. I sank quietly into my seat at the far table. Several elderly relatives nodded at me, but no conversation ensued. Ruby came running in from the garden with flushed cheeks and plopped down next to me. "Mommy, there's a girl named Zoe, and she has a pony. A real one," she whispered in my ear. "That's wonderful, sweetie," I smiled. "But we need to sit quietly now, okay? There will be speeches." The waiters began to bring out appetizers, some kind of gourmet seafood I didn't even know the name of. Ruby looked at her plate incredulously. "What is it?" she whispered. "It's a special delicacy," I said, not sure myself. "Try it. Maybe you'll like it." Uncle Greg, Teslin's father, came up with a glass in his hand. A full man with a good-natured face, he was probably the only member of the family who never openly judged me. "Dear friends and family," he began, and the hall fell silent. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the engagement of our beautiful daughter Teslin and the wonderful young man Addison Havisham." Applause. Teslin smiled modestly as she placed her hand on the palm of her fiancé's hand. Uncle Greg made a long speech about how proud he was of his daughter, how she had always been determined, how she had graduated from Princeton with honors and had a brilliant career in finance. Then came speeches from Addison's parents. They told me what a reliable, successful lawyer he was, how much he had accomplished in his 35 years. I barely listened, mechanically bringing my fork to my mouth and helping Ruby with the incomprehensible food. My thoughts wandered far away. I remembered Ethan's and my humble wedding in the city park, the simple white dress, the bouquet of wildflowers. We'd been so happy then, despite the absence of half my family. Finally, it was Teslin's turn to speak. She stood up, elegant and confident, holding her champagne glass. "Dear friends and beloved family," her voice was ringing with happiness. "I am so grateful to you all for sharing this special moment with us. Addison," she turned to her fiancé, "you have given me what I have always dreamed of, true love, respect, and support. Thank you for choosing me." She paused, looking around the room. Her eyes stayed on me for a moment, and I saw something in them that made my insides clench, a mixture of triumph and gloating. "You know," she continued, taking a small sip, "I've always believed that the right decisions lead to the right life. I chose the best education, the best career, and now the best man." Several guests nodded approvingly. "And I'm thankful that I had the wisdom not to give in to passing fancies and not to commit to the first man I met." Her gaze slid back to me. Ruby, thankfully, was absorbed in a conversation with a girl about her age sitting next to her. "I look at some of our family members and I think," Teslin paused dramatically, "I hope I never end up like her, single with a baby." The hall exploded with laughter. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. A few heads turned in my direction. Some tried to hide a smile behind a napkin, others openly giggled. My mother, my own mother, was laughing too, covering her mouth with her hand as if that could hide her betrayal. Ruby, hearing the laughter, turned to me. "Mother, why is everyone laughing? What did Aunt Teslin say that was so funny?" "Nothing, sweetie," I whispered, squeezing her hand under the table. "Grown-up jokes." Uncle Winston, who was sitting near the main table, raised his glass. "To our Teslin's wisdom," he said loudly. "She's right. Men don't want secondhand goods." A new explosion of laughter. I sat stunned, unable to move. I wanted to grab Ruby and run, but my legs felt like they were stuck to the floor. The humiliation was burning me from the inside out, and Teslin went on with her speech, as if she hadn't noticed the audience's reaction to her joke. But something was wrong. At that moment, I glanced at Addison and saw that he wasn't laughing. His face was tense, a deep crease between his eyebrows. He looked at both Teslin and Uncle Winston, and there was something like restrained rage in his gaze. Teslin ended her speech by wishing everyone to find happiness like hers, and sat down to a round of applause. It was Addison's turn to speak. He rose slowly, glanced around the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with straight features and dark hair, he looked like a man accustomed to commanding the attention of an audience. Now that I saw him closer, something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though I was sure we had never met. Thank you all for your kind words and for sharing this evening with us, he began in a deep, confident voice. I especially want to thank the Teslin family for their hospitality. He paused, adjusting his tie. You know, I've always believed that an engagement is more than just an announcement of a future marriage. It's a moment when two families get to know each other better, when new pages are opened, and sometimes closing old misunderstandings. Something in his tone made the guests tense up. Before we go on with the evening, there's something I'd like to talk about. Addison suddenly looked directly at me. Avery, isn't it? All heads turned in my direction. I felt the color flood my face. Yes, I answered barely audibly. To my amazement, Addison apologized to his guests, set his glass aside, and headed straight across the room to my table. Teslin stared after him in confusion. Uncle Winston frowned. My mother looked like she was about to faint. Addison stopped beside me and held out his hand. Addison Havisham, I think we should formally introduce ourselves. I shook his hand absent-mindedly, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. Avery Paxman. I know. He smiled slightly and then turned to the hall, still standing next to me. I think there's something they should know. And there was absolute silence in the room. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like you could touch it with your hand. I sat there, unable to move, and Addison stood beside me, confident and calm. Teslin, frozen at the head table, looked like she'd seen a ghost. What's going on, Addison? Her voice trembled. What a strange joke. Addison didn't turn to her. His gaze was directed at Uncle Winston, who had suddenly become very preoccupied with his glass. No jokes, Teslin, he replied in an even voice. I just want justice done. Ruby tugged at my sleeve, clearly disturbed. I leaned toward her. Sweetheart, why don't you go look at the fish in the fountain? I'll be right there. My daughter nodded obediently and quietly slipped away from the table. A few more children, sensing the adults' tension, also left the room. I was grateful for that. Whatever Addison was going to say, the children didn't need to hear it. Addison! Teslin rose from her seat, her face contorted with ill-concealed anger. I don't understand what's going on, but this isn't the time or place for the truth? He turned to her. I think this is exactly the right time and place. He turned to the audience again. Most of you don't know me. Let me introduce myself more fully. I'm Addison Havisham, a partner in the law firm of Bryson, Havisham and Associates. Many of you have probably heard of us. A whisper went around the room. Our family knew the firm, one of the most prestigious in Austin. But what many of you may not know, he continued, is that I worked at the same firm as Ethan Paxman, Avery's husband. Ethan had never mentioned Addison, but the truth was, he rarely talked about coworkers back home. Ethan was a junior partner at our firm. Addison spoke softer now. A talented lawyer with a bright future. We weren't close friends, but I deeply respected him as a professional. Mom coughed nervously, but remained silent. Uncle Winston signaled the waiter to bring more drinks. Teslin sat back, pale. When Ethan got sick, Addison continued, the firm supported him as best it could. We raised funds for his treatment, helped with legal matters. After he died, I personally handled some of his unfinished cases. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't know anything about it. Ethan never said his coworkers helped him. And that's when I came across something strange. Addison's voice grew harder. Among Ethan's papers was a folder labeled Eleanor Lorenz's estate. Eleanor Lorenz was my maternal grandmother. She died the year before Ethan died. Uncle Winston stood up abruptly. I don't see what all this spectacle is about, young man. If you have any legal questions, they should be discussed in an appropriate setting, not spoil the festive evening. Sit down, Mr. Lorenz, Addison said with such authority that Uncle Winston, to my surprise, obeyed. I'll explain why I chose this moment. He turned to me. Avery, your grandmother left a will that said her house in suburban Austin and a substantial amount of money, about $2 million, were to go to you. Did you know that? My heart skipped a beat. No, I whispered. I was told she'd left it all to Uncle Winston. That was a lie, Addison cut him off. Ethan had found the original will among your grandmother's papers when he'd helped her with legal matters a few months before she'd died. He'd made a copy for himself, intending to talk to her about it, but he hadn't had time. She'd passed away suddenly. Uncle Winston jumped up again. This is slander. I have a certified will that makes me the sole heir. A forgery, Addison countered calmly. A very good one, I must admit, but a forgery. I did my own investigation, checked the dates, talked to the notary who had supposedly certified the document. Turns out she was at her sister's funeral in another state on the day in question. A murmur ran through the room. Aunt Melanie put her hand to her mouth. My mother sat as if struck by thunder. My assistants have also found witnesses who can confirm that Eleanor Lorenz spoke repeatedly of her intention to leave the bulk of her inheritance to her granddaughter Avery and her child, Addison continued. He turned to Teslin. And the interesting thing, Teslin, is that there were two people involved in this fraud. You helped your uncle forge documents. Your signature is on the forged will as a witness. And it was you who received 20% of the inheritance, which amounted to about $400,000. Teslin's face contorted with rage and fear at the same time. You can't prove it, she shouted. Oh, but I can. Addison allowed himself a slight smile. All the paperwork is in place and ready to go to court. Have you forgotten that I specialize in probate cases? That's my area of expertise. I sat stunned by these revelations. Grandma Eleanor had always been good to me. Even after my marriage to Ethan, when the rest of the family had turned their backs, she'd continued to invite us over. She adored little Ruby, and often said she wanted her to get a good education. If all this is true, I finally found my voice. Why didn't Ethan say anything to me? Addison looked at me sympathetically. He was going to. There are notes in his notes that he planned to challenge the forgery. But then his condition deteriorated dramatically and he didn't finish the sentence. Why didn't you come to me earlier with this information? I asked, feeling my anger growing inside. It had been 3 years. I didn't know the whole picture at once, he answered. When Ethan died, his cases were distributed among the other lawyers. The folder with a copy of your grandmother's will got lost in the archives. I came across it by accident only last year, when I was looking for precedents for another case. Then the investigation began, gathering evidence. It took time. But why all the drama? I put my hand around the room. Why pretend to be Teslin's fiancé? There was an expression on Addison's face that I couldn't decipher, a mixture of determination and something akin to guilt. It had been not really my idea at first. I just wanted to gather evidence and contact you. But then I learned something that changed my approach. He turned to Teslin. You might want to tell me yourself why you hated your cousin so much? Why you rejoiced in her grief when Ethan died? Why you did everything you could to disinherit her? Teslin was silent, her eyes shooting lightning bolts. No? Then I'll tell you, Addison sighed. During my investigation, I came across some old photos and correspondence. Turns out Teslin and Ethan had been dating before he met Avery. I froze. Ethan had never mentioned it. It was a short affair, just a few months, Addison continued. But Teslin was serious. She was looking forward to marriage, to a long relationship. And then you came along, Avery. And Ethan made his choice. Teslin suddenly burst into a bitter laugh. Choice? He just fell for her feigned innocence. I gave him everything connections prospects me. And he chose this penniless writer he didn't want. Teslin! Exclaimed Aunt Melanie, shocked by her daughter's outburst. No, Mother, no more pretending. Teslin stood up, her hands trembling. Yes, I dated Ethan. Yes, I loved him. We were meant to be together. We had a future together. And then he met her in some crappy coffee shop and everything fell apart. I couldn't believe my ears. Ethan and Teslin? Had he never mentioned it because he knew how I felt about my cousin? He left me for her, Teslin continued, pointing a trembling finger at me. Said he'd found true love. That I was too materialistic, too calculating. Imagine, Avery, he said you were real, unlike me. Her words hurt and healed at the same time. I never knew Ethan thought that about me, that I was real. And then when Grandma died and I found out about the will, Teslin paused as if realizing she'd said too much. Anyway, it's all in the past, and no one can prove anything. I'm afraid that's not true, Addison said calmly. I have the original will, the notary's testimony, the bank statements proving the transfer of money. More than enough to win the case in court. Uncle Winston, who had been silent until then, suddenly found his voice. It's all lies. My mother wanted me to control her fortune. She knew that Avery and her husband would just squander the money. Then why didn't you present the real will in court? Addison parried. Why did you have to forge a new one? And why didn't you even let Avery attend the probate hearing? I remembered how, after my grandmother's funeral, I'd been told that the probate hearing was a mere formality and that my presence wasn't required. And then I was just left with the fact that everything went to Uncle Winston. That's all your speculation. Uncle Winston tried to keep his dignity, but his face was red. We can continue this conversation in court if you want. Addison shrugged. But I'd rather settle this amicably. Give Avery back what's rightfully hers and put the matter to rest. My mother, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke in a trembling voice. Winston, is it true? Did you forge my mother's will? Uncle Winston gave her a scornful look. Don't play innocent, Linda. You knew perfectly well that something was wrong, but you chose to turn a blind eye so you wouldn't mess things up with me. His words hit Mom like a slap. She recoiled, and I could see the realization of her own cowardice on her face. Yeah, I didn't know for sure, she mumbled. You said Mom changed her mind at the last minute. Because you wanted to believe it, Uncle Winston shouted. It was convenient for you to think your daughter didn't deserve an inheritance because of her failed marriage. Mom covered her face with her hands. Aunt Melanie put her arm around her shoulders, casting an annihilating glare at her brother and daughter. Teslin seemed to have recovered from her initial shock. She looked at Addison with hatred. So all of this, she said as she circled the hall decorated for the engagement, was a farce? You pretended to love me just so you could get your hands on the documents and avenge your dead colleague. Addison shook his head. It's not that simple, Teslin. Initially, I did meet you to gain access to information, but I didn't count on it going this far. I was hoping you'd show some sign of remorse when I started asking questions about the will. But you, he sighed, you've only strengthened my resolve to see this through. We could have been happy, Teslin hissed. You and I were the perfect couple. We had everything. Except honesty, Addison replied calmly, and a conscience. At that moment, Ruby came running into the hall. She stopped when she saw the tense faces of the adults. Mommy? She called hesitantly. Is everything all right? I held out my arms to her and she ran over and climbed into my lap. It's going to be okay, sweetheart, I said, hugging her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was telling the truth. Addison looked at Ruby and me, and his expression softened. I want to apologize to you, Avery, for not coming to you right away with this information. I had to gather all the evidence so they couldn't get away with it. He nodded toward Uncle Winston and Teslin. And I'm sorry I had to do it so publicly, but... He glanced at the guests. He glanced around at the guests, many of whom were sitting with their mouths open. I thought that after they humiliated you publicly, it was only fair that the truth be told in front of everyone. I didn't know what to say. It was too much information, too much emotion. Part of me wanted to scream with rage at Teslin and Uncle Winston. Part of me wanted to cry over my family's betrayal. And part of me wanted to thank Addison for revealing the truth. What now? Was all I could ask. Addison smiled the first time his smile seemed genuine all evening. Now, if you agree, we'll begin the process of restoring justice. We'll give you back what is rightfully yours, your grandmother's inheritance. The next half hour was a blur to me. The guests began to look around restlessly. Some hurriedly bowed out. Others, on the contrary, lingered, so as not to miss the continuation of the scandal. The waiters froze with their trays, not knowing whether to continue serving or whether the party was officially over. Teslin was the first to break the awkward silence that followed Addison's words. Her face, normally flawless, contorted with rage. How dare you? She tossed the napkin onto the table. To make this travesty at my engagement party. Her mother, Aunt Melanie, tried to calm her down, but Teslin shook her hand off her shoulder. It's over, Addison, she hissed. I won't marry you. Never. Addison, still standing next to my desk, nodded slightly. Yes, Teslin, it's obvious. I would have broken off our engagement myself after today. His calmness seemed to fuel her anger even more. You'll regret this. She grabbed the glass and drained it in one gulp. Father will sue you for slander? Uncle Greg, usually good-natured and calm, looked lost. He looked from his daughter to his wife, as if he hoped someone would explain what was going on. Uncle Winston, on the other hand, quickly pulled himself together. Adjusting his tie, he approached Addison with a feigned smile. Young man, I appreciate your loyalty to your colleague, but you're making serious accusations without sufficient evidence. It could have serious consequences for your career. Don't bother threatening me, Mr. Lorenz. Addison was nonchalant. My partners are fully aware of the situation and support my actions. I can present the evidence right now if you'd like. He patted the inside pocket of his jacket. Ruby, who was sitting on my lap, began to squirm. Mom, why is everyone so angry? That's grown-up talk, sweetheart, I whispered, stroking her head. Don't worry about it. I looked at Addison. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere else. The kids are here. He nodded understandingly. You're right. Mr. Lorenz, I suggest we meet in my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You can bring your lawyer. Uncle Winston went ballistic. Don't tell me what to do, you puppy. I will destroy you and your firm. That's hardly a good strategy, Addison said. Especially since at least 3 people here had already recorded your threats on their cell phones. I glanced around and indeed noticed that some of the guests had their smartphones at the ready, clearly filming what was going on. My mother, who had been sitting motionless all this time, suddenly stood up. Her face was pale and her hands were visibly shaking. I want to know the truth. Her voice sounded suddenly firm. Winston, did you forge Mother's will? Her uncle looked at her with undisguised contempt. Don't be a hypocrite, Linda. You were fine with the money staying in the family instead of going to this one. He nodded at me. And her offspring. Mom flinched as if struck by a blow. I never thought you were capable of such a thing. Forging Mom's last will and testament. Oh, stop the act, Teslin snorted. You always knew what he was like. You just closed your eyes because he paid your bills. I stared at them, and a wave of realization rose inside me. Uncle Winston and Teslin weren't the only ones who had betrayed me. They all knew or guessed that something foul was going on, and they kept silent, even my own mother. Ruby squirmed harder. Mommy, can we go home? I don't like it here. I hugged her tighter. Soon, sweetheart, soon. Aunt Melanie was suddenly at my side. Her usually flawless makeup was smeared with tears. Avery, she put her hand on my shoulder. I had no idea about the will, and about Ethan and Teslin either. I swear, I wanted to believe her. Aunt Melanie had always been kind, though too easily influenced by her brother and daughter. Seems like a lot of our family was built on lies, I replied quietly. The guests slowly began to disperse. Aunt Fiona, who always loved gossip, lingered at the exit, presumably so she wouldn't miss the rest of the scandal. Uncle Greg tried to reason with Teslin, who demanded that the guards escort Addison out of the room. Mr. and Mrs. Havisham have already left, Addison informed me, glancing at the empty chairs where his parents were sitting. They wanted me to apologize for the situation. They knew? I asked, surprised. Not everything, he shook his head. But I warned them that the engagement wasn't entirely sincere on my part. They supported me when I explained my reasons. Uncle Winston, meanwhile, was gathering his henchmen, 2 burly men I vaguely remembered as his business associates. This isn't over, he tossed in our direction. My lawyers will be in touch with you, Havisham. And you too, Avery. Don't think you'll be able to get a dime of Mom's inheritance. Addison smiled with such confidence that even I felt secure. I look forward to it, Mr. Lorenz. It's been a long time since I've had an interesting case. When Uncle Winston finally left, accompanied by his henchmen, Teslin gave us one last hateful glance and left as well, ostentatiously removing her engagement ring and leaving it on the table. The waiters began to clear away the untouched dishes. The few remaining guests were talking quietly among themselves, casting curious glances at us. I think we should go too, I said, rising. Ruby was already rubbing her eyes sleepily. Too many experiences for one evening. I'll walk you out, Addison offered. I need to talk to you about something if you don't mind. I nodded, unable to argue. My mother intercepted us at the exit. She looked 10 years older. Avery, I need to talk to you. Her voice was pleading. I felt my insides clench. Part of me wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But the other part, the part that remembered her laughter when Teslin humiliated me, couldn't forgive so easily. Not now, Mom, I said quietly. Ruby is tired. We'll talk later. I didn't know, she repeated. I swear I didn't know about the will. But you laughed, I said reproachfully. Today, when Teslin called me a lonely loser, you laughed with everyone else. She lowered her head. I didn't know how to react. Everyone was laughing, and I just went with the flow, I finished for her. I always do. She couldn't find anything to say, and I walked past, holding a sleepy Ruby in my arms. Addison followed me, remaining tactfully silent. The night air was cool after the stuffy hall. I inhaled deeply, feeling the tension slowly recede. Where's your car? Addison asked. Over there, I pointed to my old Ford. He led us to the car. I put Ruby, who was already asleep, in the back seat, covering her with my shawl. Are you okay? Addison asked when I straightened up. I wasn't sure, I answered honestly. This whole thing, too much to realize at once. He nodded understandingly. Look, I know you've been bombarded with a lot of information, and I'd like to go into more detail about what we've been able to find out, and our next steps. Maybe we could meet tomorrow? I looked at him more closely. In the dim light of the street lamps, his face looked tired but determined. This man, whom I was seeing for the first time in my life, had done a lot of work to bring justice. Why? Why are you doing this? I asked bluntly. Why do you care? He thought for a moment. Initially, it was just a professional interest. I came across some strange documents, and my legal intuition told me that something was wrong here. Then, as I learned more about the situation, I felt responsibility. Ethan was a good lawyer and a good man. It didn't seem right to me that his widow and child were left without what was rightfully theirs. It sounded noble, but not enough to explain all his efforts. And for that, you arranged a fake engagement to a woman you didn't love? He wrinkled his nose slightly. Not exactly. I met Teslin at a charity event about 6 months ago. Initially, I just wanted to ask her some questions, maybe get access to some documents. But when I saw the kind of person she is, the way she talks about you behind your back, the disdain she has for Ethan's memory, it became personal. I flinched. She talked about me? All the time, he sighed. And never anything good. She was literally obsessed with proving that she was better than you at everything, that Ethan made a mistake choosing you over her. I shook my head, trying to realize the extent of Teslin's hatred. All these years I'd thought her disdain was just snobbery, a rejection of my lifestyle. But behind it was personal resentment, jealousy, unshared feelings. That explains a lot, I mumbled. I'm sorry I had to make it so public, Addison said. But otherwise they would have just kept it quiet. Your family is very good at keeping secrets. They're not my family, I blurted out. Not after today. The thought was painful but liberating. Perhaps tonight had shattered the last illusions that these people had ever truly cared about me. What's going to happen next? I asked. If you really have all the evidence, as you say. We do, he nodded confidently. And then we have two choices. Either your uncle and cousin agree to a settlement, return you all the money with interest and the house, if it has not been sold yet. Or we go to court, and then we add fraud penalties to the restitution. For them, of course, prefer the first option, if they are still able to think rationally. And the house? I felt my heart sink at the thought of my grandmother's house. Big, bright, with a garden where Ruby could play. According to my records, it still belongs to your uncle. He rents it out and makes a good income. I remembered the warm kitchen with the aroma of fresh baking, the spacious veranda where my grandmother liked to have tea in the evenings. This house had always been a refuge for me, a place where I was accepted for who I was. I want it back, I said firmly. Not just the money, but the house. Addison nodded. We'll do everything we can. I'm meeting with your uncle and his lawyers tomorrow. I'm sure they'll try to intimidate us, but I have a strong position. Thank you, I extended my hand, for everything you're doing. He shook my hand. His palm was warm and dry. You're welcome. I'm just doing what I think is right. I got into the car, feeling a strange mix of emotions: anger, hurt, disappointment, but also something akin to hope. For the first time in a long time, I had an ally in the fight against my toxic family. On the drive home, I replayed the events of the evening in my head. Betrayal comes in many forms. There's the loud, obvious one, like Uncle Winston and Teslin forging the will. And there are quiet, unnoticed ones, like the silence of my mother, who must have known what was happening but chose not to interfere. Ruby was snoozing quietly in the back seat. Looking at her through the rearview mirror, I thought about how I had to protect her from all this poison, this toxicity that was eating my family from the inside out. At home, I carefully carried my daughter to bed, took off her princess dress, and covered her with a blanket. She didn't even wake up, only mumbled something in her sleep and held the stuffed hippo tighter to her. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. My hands were still shaking from the stress I'd been through. Scraps of phrases echoed in my head. Men don't want second hand. I hope I never end up like her. My mother's laughter. Uncle Winston's cold voice. I didn't cry. There was an emptiness inside, as if all emotion had burned out, leaving only fatigue and a strange, detached calm. I opened my laptop and started Googling information about Addison Havisham. The results confirmed his words. He was indeed a partner in a prestigious law firm, specializing in probate cases and having a reputation as an uncompromising but fair lawyer. Several articles mentioned his involvement in high-profile cases where he defended defrauded heirs. Not a word about his engagement to Teslin. Apparently, they'd kept the relationship a secret until the official announcement. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The lights of nighttime Austin twinkled, indifferent to my problems. Somewhere out there, in a posh mansion or penthouse, Uncle Winston was probably gathering his lawyers, preparing for tomorrow's battle. Somewhere in there, Teslin was sobbing with rage or already planning her revenge. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably realizing for the first time the extent of her cowardice. And I stood here, in my small apartment, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could make a difference in my life. To take back what was rightfully mine. Not just my money and my house, but my dignity, my self-respect. Tomorrow promised to be no less tumultuous than today. But now I was ready to fight. The house of cards of lies my family had spent years building was beginning to crumble. And though the falling cards might hurt, the road to freedom opened up beneath them. The next 2 weeks flew by like a blur. Immediately after my ill-fated engagement, Addison had officially taken on the task of representing me in the inheritance case. The first meeting with Uncle Winston and his lawyers was predictable. Threats, denials, attempts to intimidate. But when Addison laid copies of the original will with handwriting examinations, bank statements, and witness testimony on the table, their self-confidence diminished. They're going to try to drag this out, Addison warned me after the meeting. But I'm not going to let them. And he kept his word. A week after the first meeting, Uncle Winston agreed to a settlement. It included the return of the full amount of the inheritance with interest and the transfer of my grandmother's house back into my ownership. In exchange, we agreed not to press criminal charges of fraud. Why did they give up so quickly? I asked Addison when we met at the cafe to discuss the details of the agreement. He smiled, stirring his coffee. It's not just our hard evidence. Your uncle is more concerned about his reputation in business circles. A public fraud scandal could ruin his career. Plus, I've hinted that a full investigation might uncover his other shady dealings. Are there? I raised an eyebrow. Probably. Addison shrugged. People who go to such lengths to deceive me rarely limit themselves to a single episode. I'd seen a new side of Addison over the past 2 weeks. Gone was the contrived coldness he'd displayed at the engagement party. Now he was a thoughtful, considerate, and even occasionally funny man. He never pressed, always explained legal technicalities in plain language, and, what touched me most, always asked how Ruby was doing. Mom called daily. I didn't answer for the first few days, but then I picked up. I'm torn, Avery, she said, her voice full of pain. Winston is my brother, but you're my daughter. Who do you choose? I asked bluntly. She was silent for a moment, then answered quietly, "You, of course. Always you." I wanted to believe her, but the years of neglect and that laugh at the engagement party weren't easy to forget. We agreed to meet in a week. I wanted to give myself time to cool down and think. Teslin disappeared from sight after the scandal. According to my mom, she flew to the Bahamas to recuperate. I had not the slightest desire to ever see her again. When I received the first transfer from Uncle Winston, the amount in my account seemed unreal. $2,173,000 with 3 years of interest. I sat in front of the computer looking at the numbers and couldn't believe it was true. "What's wrong, Mom?" Ruby looked over my shoulder. "Why are you crying?" I hadn't noticed the tears running down my cheeks. "It's okay, sweetie," I hugged her. "It's just that sometimes justice prevails." The first thing I did with the money I got was pay for Ruby's college. Opened an account in her name that she could use when she grew up. Then I met with a financial advisor to manage the rest of the money. Some for investments, some to renovate her grandmother's house. I took possession of the house 3 weeks after signing the agreement. I went there with Ruby on Saturday morning for the first time in 3 years. The tenants had already moved out, and the house stood empty, with echoes of memories in every room. "Is this going to be my room?" Ruby asked excitedly, running into the bright bedroom on the second floor, the same one I'd stayed in when I was visiting my grandmother. "If you want," I smiled, watching her spin around the empty room. I ran my hand along the walls, remembering my grandmother. She would have approved, I'm sure. She always said this house should be filled with children's laughter. For the next few weeks, I was torn between work, taking care of Ruby, and organizing the renovations to the house. Addison unexpectedly offered to help. "My brother has a construction company," he said. "He'll give you a good discount and make sure everything is done right." I gratefully accepted his offer. We began to see each other more often. We discussed renovation plans, chose materials, sometimes just drank coffee and talked. We developed a friendship based on mutual respect and common interests. I appreciated his company, his wit and sense of humor, and how warmly he treated Ruby. Mom finally plucked up the courage to come to my house. She looked older and very unsure when I opened the door. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I let her in, still not sure I was ready for this conversation. We sat down in the kitchen. Ruby was at school, so no one could interrupt us. "I let you down," Mom began without preamble. "Not just on that engagement, but before. For years, I chose Winston and his family's side over yours." I was silent, giving her a chance to speak. "When you chose Ethan, I was afraid," she continued. "I was afraid you'd make the same mistakes I'd made, marrying for love and then struggling financially, like I had after your father died." "But you don't regret marrying him, do you?" I asked quietly. Mom shook her head. "Never. Your father was the best thing that happened in my life. But after he died, it was so hard for me on my own. And Winston offered to help, and I became dependent on him, emotionally and financially." I knew what she was talking about. After my father died of a heart attack, Uncle Winston was the one who got us back on our feet. He paid for part of my education, helped my mom with her job, and gradually turned that help into a means of control. "I want to apologize to you," Mom said, tears in her eyes, "for everything." I looked at her, an old woman with slumped shoulders, so different from the confident mother I remembered as a child. And I realized I was part of her toxic system, too. "I'm not ready to forgive," I said honestly. "Not right now, but I want you to stay in Ruby's and my life. She loves you, and you have the right to be her grandmother." Mom nodded, accepting my terms. "I don't talk to Winston anymore," she informed me. "And I'm not talking to Teslin either, after what they did." "That's your choice," I shrugged. "I'm not asking you to break up with them for me." "I'm doing it for me," she said, suddenly firm. "I'm sick of being a puppet in their hands." We talked for another hour. I can't say things were back to normal, but it was a step forward. A small, cautious step toward a new kind of relationship. 2 months after the scandalous engagement, the renovations to my grandmother's house were finished, and Ruby and I moved in. Spacious, bright rooms, a large garden, the quiet of the suburbs. It all seemed like a fairy tale after our cramped apartment. On the day of the housewarming party, I decided to have a small dinner, just for those closest to me. I invited my mother, Georgia, and Addison, who had become a true friend. It's incredibly beautiful, Georgia said as she looked around the house. Especially this terrace. The terrace was my pride, spacious, with comfortable wicker furniture and a view of the garden. It was where we decided to have dinner that warm spring evening. Ruby was running around the garden with the new puppy, a golden retriever we'd gotten when we moved in. Mom was helping me set up, and Addison was opening wine. To new beginnings, he toasted when we were finally seated at the table. And to justice, I added, raising my glass. The dinner was warm. We talked about the future, about plans, about work. Georgia told funny stories about her students. Mom shared the news she'd decided to go back to teaching elementary school. Addison discussed an interesting case he was working on. After dinner, Mom and Georgia went to put Ruby to bed. She had begged them to read to her. Addison and I stayed on the terrace, enjoying the quiet evening. Are you happy with the way things turned out? I asked, looking up at the stars in the darkening sky. He hesitated. On the whole, yes. Justice was served, you got what you were due. But I'm sorry you had to endure that public humiliation at the engagement party. Don't be. I shook my head. It was liberating. I finally saw my family for what it was. No illusions. And now what? He asked, turning to me. Are you going to cut off your relationship with them completely? With Uncle Winston and Teslin, yes. I didn't hesitate for a second. Mom, it's more complicated. She's trying to change, and I want to give her a chance, but there won't be full forgiveness. That's fair, he nodded. And you? I looked at him. Aren't you afraid Teslin will try to get revenge? To ruin your reputation? He grinned. Let her try. I have enough evidence of her fraud for her to think twice before she turns against me. We were silent for a moment, watching the fireflies in the garden, tiny living stars in the grass. You know, Addison said suddenly, when I found those documents, I didn't realize how much it would change my life. You mean the engagement fiasco? I smiled. Not only that, he shook his head. I mean meeting you. You're special, Avery. Stronger than you think you are. I felt myself blush, and I was grateful for the twilight that hid my face. I'm just doing what I have to do, I shrugged. Taking care of my daughter, working, moving on. That's strength, he said simply. Ruby's laughter and my mom's voice came from inside the house, humming a lullaby. I smiled, feeling strangely calm. Not everything in my life was perfect, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Will you still be my lawyer? I asked half-jokingly. Just in case. Both my lawyer and my friend, Addison said seriously. If that's what you want. I nodded, looking at my new home, my new life. My family's betrayal still hurt like an old wound, but it no longer defined me. I was more than their opinion of me, more than their lies and manipulations. I want to, I said quietly. I want real friends. Over the next few months, my life changed dramatically. I quit my old job and started my own small technical copywriting firm. With the financial cushion provided by an inheritance, I could afford to take risks and choose projects that really interested me. Ruby blossomed at her new school, made friends, took up swimming and drawing. In the evenings, we often sat on that very terrace, she painting, me working on my laptop, and our golden retriever snoozing nearby. Sometimes Addison would join us. He became a regular guest in our house, helping Ruby with her homework, discussing contracts with me, sometimes just coming over for dinner or to watch a movie. Mom gradually rebuilt our relationship. She did return to teaching, moved into an apartment closer to us, and came over for lunch every Sunday. We didn't talk about the past, didn't bring up Uncle Winston or Teslin. It was an unspoken rule. I only learned about them from random gossip or news stories. Uncle Winston had lost some big clients after the scandal. Apparently, it had leaked into the business community. Teslin had returned from the Bahamas and was rumored to be meeting with some European businessman. I didn't care. They were part of the past I had left behind. One warm summer evening, almost a year after the scandalous engagement, Addison and I were sitting on the terrace again. Ruby was already asleep, and we were enjoying the silence and a glass of wine. Are you happy, Avery? He asked suddenly. I thought about that simple but complicated question. You know, I think I am, I finally answered. Not like I was with Ethan, that's different. But I'm calm. I have a purpose. I have people I love and trust. It's a kind of happiness. He nodded, understanding. What about you? I asked. Right now, here, yes, he answered simply. We sat in cozy silence, watching the moon rise over the garden. Two people whose paths had crossed thanks to an old family secret. Not lovers, not just friends, something in the middle, something for which we had no definition. And that was okay. After everything I'd been through, I'd learned to appreciate the present without demanding clear answers and big names. To new horizons, Addison said, raising his glass. To new horizons, I echoed, feeling the warm breeze bring the scent of jasmine, my grandmother's favorite flower from the garden. And I knew she would approve. Approved of my path, my decisions, my new life. A life without a toxic family, without the constant feelings of guilt and inferiority. A life where I was finally me, Avery Paxman, a strong woman ready to protect myself and my daughter from any storm.